Hey, I've got a question for you. What happens when you mix a 21-year-old amateur scientist nicknamed Madman Mike and 6 stolen power generators in a blender and hit spin? You get the most metal time traveler of all time. Let's go. In 1995, a caller phoned into Art Bell's radio show, Coast to Coast AM, after Bell had asked him to be on. The program was by this point famous, or maybe infamous, for its discussion of topics ranging from Bigfoot to ghosts to aliens, and everything in between. He had recently read a story in the Kansas City Star about a Missouri man, Mike Marcum, who had been arrested for stealing parts to build a time machine. He had to get him on the show. On that fateful day that he picked up the phone to call in, Mike, later known to the Coast to Coast audience as Madman, a nickname given to him by Bell, told a story. A short time prior, Marcum had decided to make, as he put it, a fancy Jacob's ladder, a device for a high-voltage climbing electrical arc, or again, as he put it, a gizmo like the old Frankenstein movies. He basically thought that they looked cool, and he wanted to build one. And to be fair, they do look very cool. After constructing his device out of parts he was able to scrounge together, including a disassembled CD laser, Marcum switched his contraption on. But to his astonishment, rather than just the light show he had envisioned, a shimmering aura was cast from the invention. A curious Marcum decided to throw a screw into what he described as a vortex created by the machine, and incredibly, the screw reappeared a few feet away seconds later, after initially vanishing into thin air. The device then burned up, quite literally, from the sheer output of power. The inventor, in shock, decided it could be only one of two things: a strong electromagnetic field generated by the device, or he had just witnessed literal time travel, some sort of dimensional rift, or kind of both. So I guess 3 things. Art Bell compared this test to the Philadelphia experiment, a supposed Navy wartime test where a Navy ship was made to disappear along with its entire crew, traveling through time and space only to reappear later with terrifying results. Bell also connected Marcum's test to those done in Montauk during the Montauk Project. Was Mike Marcum really able to tap into the same technology using only household components? Before long, and now attempting to build a literal time machine, Madman hatched a plan to go into the future by a few days, find out the winning lottery numbers, and then return to the present. The ultimate get-rich-quick scenario. I will note, he later said that the lottery bit was just a joke, and his intentions were purely scientific. But to build a time machine that would accommodate a person, Marcum needed lots of power. Sending a screw or a small object through a vortex is one thing, but a person? That requires serious wattage. How was he going to supply the power needed for this type of experiment? He quickly realized that he could buy power generators, but that would require capital he didn't have. So he went with Plan B. Enlisting the help of a few friends from his job at a lumber supply company, the would-be mad scientist decided to steal 6 power generators from a local power station, since buying them would be impossible for him at the time. While conducting further experiments, however, Marcum actually caused several power outages to entire areas of his town, and the power company began looking for the culprit. It wasn't this that brought police to his doorstep, however, as Marcum described having a party with a few buddies. This resulted in those same buddies using Mike's BB gun and accidentally shooting his neighbor's house, resulting in a vandalism call. When police arrived, they found trash can-sized power generators just sitting around in Mike's living room. The case of the missing power generators was solved. Mike's story then hit the local papers, not from the power outages exactly, but from him admitting to attempting to build a time machine. It was this story that would get the attention of Art Bell and his audience. Upon his release from jail, where he claims he was able to think uninterrupted about how to build a time machine, his experiments continued, now with lots of financial support and equipment, supposedly in the millions of dollars range, from donors given to him after his radio exposure from being on Coast to Coast. Telling Art Bell on the show, he planned to enter his time machine from his lab, the location of which was also supplied from a Coast to Coast listener, with nothing more than his cell phone, and a short time later, disappeared without a trace. Was this the end of Madman Mike Marcum? Shortly after he vanished, another caller on Coast to Coast would describe a police report they had seen from the 1930s of an unrecognizable man crushed to death inside a metal tube, holding what appeared to be a cell phone that had been found on a California beach. Was this the time traveler? But what really happened? Did Marcum travel to the past only to be crushed by his own invention, perishing 3/4 of a century in the past? Well, no. Not exactly. According to Marcum in a call to Bell years later, he had indeed entered his time machine, as he had told Coast to Coast, from his lab in Kansas and leapt forward in time, bursting through to the other side of the portal generated by the device, 2 years in the future and 800 miles to the east, landing in the middle of a field in Ohio. He said the feeling was like getting hit with a flashbang grenade. His mind, scrambled by the electromagnetic field generated by this machine, gave him temporary memory loss. After getting his bearings and remembering who he was, he wandered to Fairfield, Ohio, the closest town, utterly shocked to find that he was nearly 2 years in the future, and began the process of rebuilding his life. Strangely, when he was able to make it back to his lab, all of his equipment, every last scrap of technology, was missing. He claims that the only ones who even knew that his lab existed were the donors to his project. Someone had stolen his time machine and all of his research. In a 2015 interview with Bell, the radio host seemingly confirms all of this, saying that from 1998 until the year 2000, Marcum had vanished off the face of the earth. There was no record of him existing anywhere for nearly 2 years. Coincidentally, the time in which he entered his device until the time he emerged from the other side. No one was able to account for his whereabouts during this entire period of time. Although Mike Marcum seems to have lost his work, it hasn't stopped him from continuing his research, still attempting to rebuild his time machine that he says he has lost, along with all of his plans. So the question we have to ask ourselves then is Madman Marcum really a time traveler? Or is this story the only thing that was invented? Until next time, take care, friends. Hello, I'm your host, Tinfoil Tom, and today we're investigating a visitor from the future. The future, full of hoverboards, power laces, and auto-drying jackets. A place full of flying DeLoreans and punk kids from the 1980s trying to prevent a nightmarish future version of Hill Valley. Wait, wrong movie. But I am talking about a version of the future. One that is complete with apocalyptic predictions about a future war that ends with the deaths of billions of people and a, darn it, wrong movie again. But people's lives are still at stake in this story. This episode is about the future, or a possible future. On today's episode, we're talking about a time soldier named John Titor. As I've now done a few times in the past, and because everybody loves a trilogy, I refer to the godfather of ghoulish, the superintendent of spooky, and the master of the macabre, Art Bell, who started the amazing talk show Coast to Coast AM, which focuses on everything from UFOs to ghost encounters and everything in between. This will be my last investigation involving the late and great Art Bell for now, but I urge you to look up some past episodes of his program. On an evening in 1998, Art opened up his phone lines, as he often did, and received not a phone call, but a fax. For those of you who don't know what a fax is, and yes, I'm dating myself here, it was essentially a way to send somebody a scan of something, say a document or text, before email was a thing, over phone lines. Ah, technology. We've come a long way. Art actually read that fax on the air. What I present to you now is that audio evidence as read by Art Bell in 1998. And roll tape.
Dear Art, I had a fax when I heard other time travelers calling in from any time past the year 2500 AD. Please let me explain. Time travel was invented in 2034. Offshoots of certain Successful fusion reactor research allowed scientists at CERN to produce the world's first contained singularity engine. The basic design involves rotating singularities inside a magnetic field. By altering the speed and direction of rotation, you can travel both forward and backward in time. Time itself can be understood in terms of connected lines. When you go back in time, you travel on your original timeline. When you turn the singularity engine off, a new timeline is created due to the fact that you and your time machine are now there. In other words, a new universe is created. To get back to your original line, you must travel a split second farther back and immediately throw the engine into forward without turning it off. Some interesting outcomes of this are: 1. You meet yourself. I have done it often, even taken a younger version of myself along for a few rides before returning myself to the new timeline and going back to mine. 2. You can alter history in the new universe that you have just created. Most of the time, the changes are subtle. Sometimes I'll notice car models that don't exist or books that come out late. The oldest one was a skyscraper that wasn't built in a near-favorite store of mine in New York. Interestingly, when you travel in time, you must compensate for the orbit of the Earth. Since the time machine doesn't move, you have to adjust the engine so you remain on the planet when you turn it off. Unfortunately, it was also discovered that anyone going forward in time from my 2036 hit a brick wall in the year 2564. Everyone who has ever been there has reported that nothing exists. When the machine is turned off, you find yourself surrounded by blackness and silence.
In posts on the Time Traveler Institute forums, and later Coast to Coast own forums and in faxes sent into Art while he was on the air, Titor claimed to be a soldier from the year 2036, sent back in time to the year 1975 to retrieve components from an IBM 5100 computer, to debug various computer systems in the future, to prevent a catastrophe stemming from the year 2038 problem, a real thing in our future, which involves issues from the computer's processors suffering some sort of malfunction due to limitations in the systems they power, causing all sorts of chaos. Many think of this as a Y2K2 type scenario, with more potentially far-reaching problems occurring as a result of it. Did the military send somebody back in time to prevent a failure of our future tech? According to Titor, on his many forum posts from around this time period, he was selected for this top-secret mission because his grandfather had actually worked on the IBM 5100. And Titor, keen on preventing many of the events that would occur during his timeline, leapt at the chance, even going so far as to warn everybody he came in contact with about an upcoming civil war, nuclear blasts, an illness called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and even made a quick stopover in the year 2000 to grab various artifacts lost in the potential upcoming civil war, such as family photos, just in case he was unable to prevent the upcoming battles. He also warns, as you've previously heard in the Call to Art Bell, of a literal void of nothingness around the year 2564. What happened there, and why? Titor claimed that time soldiers like him were trying to stop whatever this impending doom was, or at least figure out what happened and attempt to stop it. As the ultimate time-traveling badass, Titor described his vehicle through time as being powered by a, quote, stationary mass temporal displacement unit powered by two top-spin dual-positive singularities, end quote, made by GE, mounted to a 1967 Corvette. Yeah, because I'm sure nobody would care about a time-traveling Corvette. That's just cool, man. But what if any of these predictions were true? We didn't collapse into a total hellscape during Y2K. A civil war didn't happen. Although the United States has become more heavily divided, it is still not to that extent that Titor described. A full-scale World War III didn't happen either. nuclear war didn't wipe out half the Earth's population. As with many early internet legends, it would seem this may have been an elaborate form of storytelling involving internet forums, Coast to Coast AM, and fax machines. According to Joseph Matheny, the creator of the Ong's Hat ARG, via Thrillist, he actually worked on the John Titor project that confirms that this just may be a story, if we are to believe him. Matheny went on to say, quote, "I'm going to be picky with what I say to you over what I've said in the past. John Titor is a story that was created as a literary experiment by people who were observing what I was doing with Ong's Hat. And these people wanted to do something like that. I was a consultant on the project, but it wasn't my project." End quote. Speculation is that because Matheny is the only project member to come forward as of yet, and will not reveal the actual creators, is that he is either A, not telling the truth, or B, is telling the truth, but because nobody else has actually admitted to being John Titor, that the internet did what it does and spread the story into legend, and it became truth rather than fiction. The thing about the John Titor legend is that it is constructed in such a way that regardless of what you believe, there is no way to prove it did or didn't happen definitively. If you choose to believe Titor's story, he himself prevented the worst from occurring. So even if it was set to take place, he has altered the future on our timeline. Or if it's false, with no one to directly point the finger at, you can't 100% say that it is in fact false. Time travel is a really tricky thing, especially when it's so complex, as it is in this case. Titor does seem to have in-depth knowledge of various computer systems, and a lot of things he said could be interpreted as truth or some version of it. I think, for this one, I'll have to dive deep, very deep, to get to the truth. So let's just call this the first file, with more intel coming at a later date, in the future, or the past, present.
Tinfoil Tom! Tinfoil Tom! It's me, Aluminium Alan.
What? How did you get in here? This is a secure area.
Listen up, boyo, because I'm you from Earth 69,420. We have to talk.
Want more truth? Every week, Tinfoil Tom presents to you the Unbelievable Mysteries podcast. Link to that show is in the description of this video. Thank you for all the support and encouragement. It really means a lot to me. And if you could do me one huge favor, please ring that bell so you get notifications when an upload is posted to this channel. Thank you for your commitment to the truth. Hello, I'm your host, Tinfoil Tom, and today we're examining the subject of an experiment, the Philadelphia experiment. For years, I assumed the 1984 film The Philadelphia Experiment was just that, film, a work of fiction, something you see on a Friday night with a few buddies, tossing around some frosty Pepsi Maxes and a bucket of popcorn. A sci-fi 80s epic co-starring Nancy Allen, who would later go on to co-star in RoboCop. But what if the movie was actually true?
Of course it's not true, you idiot. At least not the movie. Tinfoil Tom, did you get the file I sent you?
Uh-huh.
Oh my god, do I have to do everything around here? Did you read it?
Read what?
The file! The file! Read the file. It has the intel. Jesus, I come back from the future and I have to deal with this malarkey. Just read the file, follow the notes, and I'll get you a cookie.
Ooh, a cookie.
Yeah, great. Expose the truth and all that. I'll be in the hot tub with a bottle of Jack Daniels, and infinite regret for putting the fate of the world in your hands.
So what was true about the Philadelphia experiment? Well, for starters, the movie was based on something real, but took extreme liberties in its storytelling. It's a Hollywood adaptation of some of the strange tales concerning whatever happened in those shipyards. As the story goes, in 1943, the US Navy allegedly made a warship, a Cannon-class destroyer escort named the USS Eldridge, vanish. Reports indicate a strange, greenish-blue glow was cast around the ship's hull once certain top-secret equipment was powered on. And it warped from the Philadelphia naval shipyards to Virginia and back. So instead of just cloaking, it actually teleported. So dangerous was the journey through space and time that most of the ship's crew fell victim to madness, or were grotesquely fused to the ship itself. It was truly an awful sight to behold if these reports, and indeed there are several, are true. Now, we have a few different accounts of the tale from different perspectives, but I am focusing on the testimony of Al Bielek, who supposedly led a double life, one as a loving family man and the other as a shadowy military scientist, working on Black Ops projects like Montauk Project, a secret government operation which dealt with experimentation in time travel and psychic warfare, and, of course, the now infamous Philadelphia Experiment, among other operations. If Montauk Project sounds familiar, it's because Stranger Things took some serious inspiration from the events supposedly transpiring at the military complex, which actually did exist in Montauk, New York. But more on that another time. Today we're talking about Philly, baby! Woo! Remember that film from the beginning? The one which sparked my initial interest in this subject? It also inspired Al Bielek to go public with his alleged first-hand knowledge of the Philadelphia experiment. Shortly after seeing the film, a flood of memories rushed into Bielek's mind. He questioned them, but they were so real. Had his memories been replaced? What was real? In the end, Bielek pieced together the fragments and put it all back together. The puzzle of his life was reassembled. And so it was, in 1989, he came forward publicly.
Hello, my name is Alfred Bielek, more commonly known as Al Bielek. Original family name is Edward Cameron.
When Al Bielek woke up, he remembered a few things. Among them, he wasn't actually named Al Bielek. He was, in fact, another man altogether, by the name of Edward Cameron, born in 1916, a full decade before he was quote-unquote officially born. And he had different parents, a different life, and a brother, Duncan Cameron, who he had by now been long estranged from. Both had enlisted in the military for service during the Second World War and quickly rose in rank and stature, eventually working under figures like Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and Dr. John von Neumann, specifically on a secret project to cloak warships and essentially render them invisible, something extremely important and strategically valuable during World War II. German U-boats had a reputation of ruthless precision when it came to sinking Allied ships, and the Allies needed an advantage to help win the war, and this technology would give them such an advantage. So it was that on a warm August night in 1943, after months of preparation, and a successful previous test on a smaller vessel, a new test was set to render an entire warship invisible, and Bielek and his brother were chosen to operate the controls from below deck on the USS Eldridge for this, the Philadelphia Experiment. Everything was fine at first, but the experiment quickly grew out of control. Flashes of light began to erupt from the equipment, and the brothers were unable to shut down the power. The radio picked up nothing but static as they cried out for help. And upon escaping the control room, which by this point was totally unstable, and reaching the upper deck of the ship, the brothers saw that the ship was surrounded by a strange fog. I want to tell you more, but let's have Al Bielek himself tell you what happened next.
We went for the railing. We both had the same idea at the same time. Let's jump overboard and swim ashore. There's nothing we can do. Everything appeared normal to the ship, up to the railing and slightly beyond. But a short distance beyond the railing, there was nothing but a solid gray fog. Well, we didn't think anything about that. We said, let's jump overboard, and we did. I mean, we didn't say this verbally. This was, shall we say, simultaneous mental thinking. We jumped overboard, and we never hit the water. We were good swimmers. We weren't worried about the height. Never hit the water. We started to fall. The sensation was like falling down an elevator shaft with no bottom. And down we went, and down we went. And suddenly, we were, shall we say, perhaps panic-stricken. We didn't have enough time to worry about being panic-stricken, but we were totally dismayed. We had not the slightest idea what was going on. We were more or less side by side. And this went on until what we estimate was about 2 minutes later. We arrived in a very strange location. At night, standing upright, next to a chain link fence. And it was dark. We didn't know where we were, but we knew it was a military base in all likelihood because the chain link fence was of a military design. At that point, very suddenly, a very bright spotlight beamed down on us, illuminated us very brightly. We wondered what that was. Well, we knew what searchlights were, but it was on a helicopter, and helicopters were unknown to us because in 1943 there were very few. They were experimental. But as it turned out, this was a production-type helicopter, as we learned later. But MPs came out of someplace and grabbed us and took us to a building. In the building, on an elevator, down the elevator shaft, the door opens. We see a lot of military personnel and a very elderly civilian in a gray business suit, white hair, what was left of it on the sides of his head, walking towards us. He looks at us and says, "Gentlemen, I've been expecting you. I'm Dr. John Von Neumann." So we look at him. He says, "You're who?" I says, "I'm Dr. John Von Neumann." Couldn't be. We left him approximately an hour or so ago. And he's a much younger man. Couldn't be you. He looked at us rather sternly and says, "Gentlemen, this is not 1943. This is 1983. I am the same Dr. Von Neumann you knew in 1943, except I'm 40 years older. Welcome to the Montauk Air Force Station," or words to that effect.
Somehow, the brothers had entered a hole in space and time and ended up encountering their old boss, 40 years older, in 1983. Von Neumann gave Bielik and his brother a tour of the Montauk facility, and Bielik had his mind absolutely blown by a commercial for American Airlines advertising Hawaiian vacations. I mean, I understand. If I could visit Hawaii for what it cost in 1983, I'd be blown away too. After some rest, Von Neumann informed the brothers of the grave reality of the situation. A hyperspace bubble had been created by the Eldridge, which was still lost in this hole in space-time, and it was growing bigger by the minute thanks to the unstable experimental equipment aboard the Eldridge, and the inability to power it down. If left unchecked, this could, in theory, envelop the entire Earth with disastrous consequences. Someone had to be sent back to the decks of the ship to destroy the equipment, and the brothers were the men chosen for the mission. Von Neumann informed the brothers that with the time technology available to them at Montauk, they'd be able to send them back to the precise moment necessary, and then they had to dismantle the equipment by any means at their disposal. They agreed, and fitted with radiation suits to protect them, they were hurled through time again, landing on board the decks of the Eldridge, into a sight straight out of a horror film like Event Horizon. Men were literally fused to the decks of the ship, some alive, some dead. Those alive screamed out in utter agony. The sailors not fused to the ship had mostly gone insane and were running about the decks of the ship in fits of absolute psychosis. Bielik and his brother Duncan grabbed some fire axes in the control room and set to work smashing any and all equipment related to the project. And as the ship began to phase back out of hyperspace, field energy from the coils starting to wane, back on deck, Duncan, finally taking in the sight that the Eldridge was in and the absolute horror of the situation, took a look back at his brother, a hand on the ship's railing as if to say, "You comin'?" and then leapt back over the edge of the ship, into the fog, traveling through time to parts unknown. Bielik stayed behind as the ship finally phased back into 1943, Navy personnel finally boarding the ship, surveying the carnage. For Bielik, many hours, or perhaps even days had passed, but for those initially watching the ship vanish in 1943, it had only been mere moments. Bielik went on to work on many other secret government operations at Montauk, but more on that in a later episode. For now, though, we've just taken a quick quantum leap through time to tell you this chapter of Al Bielik's incredible story. I hope to bring you more on this at a later date and time. Until then, I've been your host Tinfoil Tom saying, keep searching for the truth, and whatever you do, stay away from the dang time fog. Bye-bye.
Want more truth? Every week, Tinfoil Tom presents to you the Unbelievable Mysteries podcast. Link to that show is in the description of this video. Thank you for all the support and encouragement. It really means a lot to me. And if you could do me one huge favor, please ring that bell so you get notifications when an upload is posted to this channel. Thank you for your commitment to the truth.